She came out of the snow like something the cold had decided to give back. No wagon, no man beside her, just a woman in a wet coat too thin for that country, standing on my porch with the wind tearing at her hair, holding a bundle against her chest like it was the only warm thing left in the world. I'd lived alone on that ranch 11 winters. I'd stopped expecting anybody. So when she looked up at me, half frozen, jaw set hard against the shaking, and said the words she said, I thought the cold had finally gotten into my own head. I need you to marry me, she said, tonight, and don't ask me why until it's done. I'm not a young man, and I've made my peace with a quiet life. But that night I learned that some knocks at the door aren't asking to come in. They're asking you to become someone you'd forgotten how to be. This is the part of my life I never told anybody. I'm telling it now. Old Boone hadn't gotten up off his blanket for anything in 2 years except food and thunder. And there he was at the door, hackles up, making a sound low in his chest that wasn't quite a growl. I set down my coffee. Outside, the wind was doing what it does in late November up there, coming off the high benches like it had a grudge, throwing snow sideways against the glass so the whole window looked like it was breathing. Then the knock. 3 soft taps, knuckles, not a fist, the kind of knock a person makes when they're not sure they ought to. I'll tell you what went through my head because I've thought about it a lot since. I thought, nobody good knocks after dark in a storm. 11 winters, and the only people who'd ever come up my road in weather were trouble or lost, and the lost ones usually turned out to be trouble too. I took the rifle down off the pegs, not because I meant to use it, because a man living alone learns to answer the door with his hands full. I opened it a crack, and there she was. I want to be careful how I say this because it would be easy to lie and make it pretty. She wasn't pretty the way the word gets used. She was past that, the way you get past it when life has been working on you. Her face was raw with cold, her lips gone a color lips shouldn't be, and there was a smear of something dark along her jaw, dried blood or mud, I couldn't tell. Her coat was soaked through at the shoulders. Her boots were the wrong boots, town boots, the soles already coming away at the toe. But her eyes were steady. That's the thing I noticed and couldn't shake. A person that cold and that scared ought to have eyes going every direction, and hers were dead level on mine, like she'd already decided something and was just waiting on me to catch up. Mister, she said, I'm sorry. That was the first thing. Not help me, not please. Sorry. Like she already knew she was about to be a burden and wanted it on the record that she didn't take it lightly. Then the bundle against her chest moved and made a small sound, and I understood there was a child in it. I've kept a tally book most of my life, a habit my father drilled into me, write down what comes in and what goes out, cattle, money, weather, dead and born. I keep one for everything. Most nights I write 3 lines and quit. That night I didn't write anything for 2 days, and when I finally did, the first line was just, she came in the storm. The boy was blue around the mouth, because that's the part that decided it, not her, the boy. I opened the door the rest of the way. Get in here, I said. You're letting the cold in. She didn't move at first. She looked at the rifle in my other hand, and I looked at it too, like it belonged to a stranger, and I set it back on the pegs. Then she came in, small and stiff, walking like her legs had stopped being hers somewhere back on the road. I got the fire built up. I got a blanket, the good wool one I never used that had been my wife's, and I didn't even think about it being hers until later. The woman sat on the edge of the hearth and unwrapped the boy enough to check him over, and her hands were shaking so bad she couldn't manage the knot, so I knelt down and did it for her. The boy was maybe 2 years old. He had a fever already. I could feel it coming off him, that papery dry heat that scares you worse than the cold does. His cheeks were chapped. He looked up at me without crying, which somehow was worse than crying. How long were you out there? I said. Since the relay station, she said. The man there wouldn't take us further. The roads west are closed with the snow, he said. She stopped, swallowed. He said there was a place up the mountain road, a man who kept to himself. That's me, I said, more or less. I made broth. I'm not much of a cook, but I can make broth, and I got some down the boy with a spoon, a little at a time, and some down her, and slowly the worst of the shaking left her, and she started to look like a person again instead of a thing the storm had carried. The dog, who hated everyone, lay down against the boy's feet and put his chin on his paws and didn't move. I never did understand that dog. For a long time none of us said much. The fire ticked. The wind kept at the window. I sat across from her in my chair and I waited, because I'd learned a long time ago that people tell you what they came to tell you when they're ready, and pushing only makes them lie. When she'd warmed up enough to talk, she told me her name was Clara. The boy was Sam. She didn't give me a last name, which I noticed. And then she said the thing she'd said on the porch, but slower this time, with the heat back in her, so the words had to fight their way out. I meant it, she said. What I said outside, I need you to marry me. There's a preacher down in the valley, I have money to pay the license. I'm not asking you for. She stopped and her face did something complicated and she started over. I'm not asking you to want me. I'm asking you to put your name on a paper. That's all it would have to be. After I'd work. I'd earn my keep in the boys, and when the road opens in spring we'd go and you'd never see us again. You could tear the paper up. I'll be honest. My first thought was that she was running from a man, a husband, and I wasn't about to step between a man and his wife, no matter what kind of brute he might be, because that's a fast way to get yourself killed and solve nothing. So I asked her plain, whose boy is that? And she told me. Her husband was dead, 3 weeks dead, of a fever that had gone through their settlement and taken him and his brother's wife both in the same week. They'd had 160 acres down on the flat, proved up, the deed in her husband's name. And her husband's brother, a man named Royce, she said it like the name tasted bad, had decided that with his brother gone, the land came to him. And the boy, too, because the law in those parts, or the way men like Royce read the law, said a widow with no man had no standing, and a child needed a guardian, and who better than blood? He doesn't want Sam, she said. He wants the land Sam stands to inherit, and he wants me gone or under his roof where I can't make trouble about it. He told me to my face. He said a woman alone can't keep a deed. He said it like he was doing me a kindness. Her hands had stopped shaking. They were folded in her lap now, very still, and somehow that was more frightening than the shaking had been. If I'm married, he can't take Sam from me. A married woman with a husband, the law leaves her be. He needs me to be alone, so I won't be alone. I sat there. Here's the part I'm not proud of. My first feeling wasn't pity, and it wasn't anger on her behalf. My first feeling was that I wanted her to leave. I wanted the door to close behind her and the boy and the trouble that came with them, and I wanted to go back to my coffee and my tally book, and the 11 winter quiet I'd built around myself like a man building a wall one rock at a time. Because I knew what that quiet had cost me, and what it had bought. I'd had a wife, Margaret, and a daughter, Ruth, who'd have been 17 that year. They'd gone in the space of a single bad April. The diphtheria took Ruth first and then Margaret a week after, and afterward I'd taken every soft thing in that house and put it away in a trunk, and I'd carved little wooden animals to keep my hands from doing worse, and I'd lined them up on the windowsill, one for every month I'd survived. There were 130 some of them on that sill the night Clara knocked. A whole herd of little carved animals that nobody but me had ever looked at. That was the quiet. That was what the wall was made of. And a man does not let a stranger over a wall like that without knowing he's going to bleed for it. You don't know me, I said. I could be the worst kind of man. You knelt down and untied my son's blanket, she said. And you used a blanket that smells like a woman who isn't here anymore, and you flinched when you handed it over and thought I didn't see. I know enough. I didn't have an answer for that. The boy, Sam, was asleep against the dog by then, his fever flush high on his cheeks, one small hand open and loose the way only a sleeping child's gets. And I thought about Ruth at that age, and I thought about the trunk, and I thought about all the months on the windowsill, and something in me that I'd believed was dead turned over in its sleep. I didn't say yes that night. I want that on the record too. I'm not a man who says yes easy. I told her she and the boy could stay till the boy's fever broke. I made up the spare room, Ruth's room, though I didn't tell her that, and I lay awake most of the night listening to the storm and the unfamiliar sound of other people breathing under my roof, a sound I'd forgotten could fill a house the way water fills a low place. The fever broke on the third day. I'd half expected, when it did, to wake up and find them gone, that the staying had only ever been about the boy getting strong enough to travel, and that I'd come downstairs to a cold stove and an empty room and a strange, hollow relief. Instead, I came down to find Clara at my stove with her sleeves rolled, frying eggs from hens I hadn't known were still laying because I'd stopped checking, and the boy on the floor playing with one of my carved animals, a little wooden horse that he'd somehow gotten down off the sill. I should have taken it from him. It was the last one I'd carved when Margaret was alive. Instead, I stood in the doorway and watched a child push a wooden horse across my floor and make the sound a horse makes, and I felt my whole chest go tight and strange. Clara turned and saw me. She saw where I was looking. "I'm sorry," she said, and started toward the boy to take it. "Leave it," I said. My voice came out rougher than I meant. "He can have it." She stood very still and looked at me, and something passed over her face that I won't try to name, because nomming it would make it smaller than it was. We rode down to the valley on the fourth day. The roads were bad but passable on horseback, the boy bundled in front of me on the saddle because Clara's town boots couldn't manage stirrups, and a child both. The preacher down there was an old man named Hollies who'd married me to Margaret 20 years before and buried her and Ruth, and he didn't ask a single question, which is the truest kindness a man in his line of work can offer. We stood in his cold little church with the boy on Clara's hip and the dog waiting outside the door, and we said the words. I'd thought it would feel like nothing, a paper, a formality, two strangers and a lie of convenience like she'd promised. But when Hollies got to the part about for better or worse, and Clara said her piece looking straight ahead at the cross on the wall, and then it came my turn, I heard my own voice say the words, and they didn't feel like a lie. That's the thing I couldn't have told you that morning and can't fully explain now. They felt like the first true thing I'd said out loud in 11 years. On the ride back up the mountain, the snow had stopped and the sun came out hard and bright on all that white, the way it does after a storm, so the whole world looked scrubbed and new and a little merciless. The boy fell asleep against my chest. Clara rode beside me, quiet, her hands red on the reins. "You can still tear the paper up," she said after a long while. "In spring, like I said, I haven't changed the terms on you." "I know it," I said. I didn't tell her that something had already changed, somewhere down in the church, in the saying of the words. I didn't have the words for it yet, and I'd learned the hard way that the things you can't afford to lose are the things you keep your mouth shut about, in case saying them out loud is what makes them go. So I rode the rest of the way home with a sleeping boy against my chest and a wife beside me I'd known for 4 days, and I watched the smoke from my own chimney come into view over the rise. And for the first time in a long time, the sight of my house didn't make me feel like the last man on earth. What I didn't know, what neither of us knew yet, was that Royce wasn't the kind of man who let a thing go just because the law had been spoken over it. He was already on his way up the mountain. Winter came down hard after that, and for a stretch of weeks the mountain belonged to us alone. I'd forgotten how a house works when there's more than one person in it, how it organizes itself around the others, how you start measuring the day by somebody else's habits, Clara up before light, the boy down for his nap when the sun hit the south window, the dog moving from room to room to be near whoever was being still. I'd lived so long by my own clock that having another body's rhythm laid over mine felt at first like wearing a coat that wasn't broke in. And then, somewhere in there, it got broke in, and I stopped noticing I was wearing it at all. Clara worked the way she'd promised, and harder. She found the parts of the place I'd let go, and there were a lot of them, because a man alone keeps only what he can stand to look at. She got the hens laying steady. She mended things I'd been stepping over for years. One afternoon I came in from the barn and found she'd taken down the dust sheets I put over the front room furniture the spring Margaret died, and washed and aired the cushions, and I stood in the doorway with my heart going hard and didn't know whether to be furious or to weep, and in the end I did neither. I just sat down in a chair I hadn't sat in for 11 years, and Clara watched me do it, and neither of us said a word about it. She understood things without being told. That was her gift, I think. She'd had to learn to read men's silences to survive them, and she turned that same reading on me gentle when she could have used it as a weapon. The boy was the part I hadn't braced for. Sam took to me the way small children do, with no sense at all of what's appropriate, climbing into my lap uninvited, falling asleep on my chest in the evening, holding up his arms when he wanted carrying as though it had never once occurred to him I might say no. And God help me, I never could say no. He called me nothing at first. Then one day, watching Clara call me by my name across the yard, he started calling me by it too, in his small mangled way. Eli came out ye. And the first time he said it, I had to turn around and find something in the barn to do with my hands so nobody would see my face. I'd buried a daughter. I'd put away every soft thing. And here was this boy who wasn't mine, undoing it all without the slightest idea he was doing it, just by needing me and assuming I'd be there. I started carving again, not the grief animals on the sill, different ones for the boy, a little dog that looked like Boone, a bear, a man on a horse. He lined them up the way I used to line up mine, and the seeing of it nearly took the legs out from under me. I should tell you about the night Clara told me the rest, because there was a rest, and it changes how you'll see what came after. It was late, the boy down, the dog asleep. She was darning by the fire and I was at the table with my tally book, and out of nowhere she said, "You haven't asked me how my husband died." "You told me," I said, "the fever." "He had the fever," she said. "That part's true." She kept her eyes on the darning. "But the fever didn't kill him. Royce did, not with his hands, with waiting. My husband was sick and weak in the bed, and the doctor was 4 hours off, and Royce had the only horse fit to ride, and he stood in that room and he looked at his brother dying and he did the sums in his head, what he stood to gain, and then he said the roads were too bad to risk the horse. And he let him die. I watched him do it. I watched him decide." The fire ticked. I set down my pencil. "I have never told a living soul that," she said, "because there's no proving it. A man can always say the roads were bad, but I know what I saw on his face. He weighed his own brother against 160 acres, and the acres came out heavier." She finally looked up at me. "That's the man who's coming for Sam. I need you to understand what he is. He is not a hard man who will listen to reason. He is a man who has already done the arithmetic on a child." I understood then why she'd ridden into a storm with town boots and a fevered baby rather than stay one more night under that man's roof. And I understood that the paper we'd signed wasn't a convenience. It was the only wall standing between Sam and a man who did arithmetic on children. "He won't get past me," I said. It came out quiet, but I meant it down to the bone. Clara looked at me for a long moment. "You don't owe us that," she said. "You signed a paper, that's all you signed up for. Not," she gestured, taking in the room the boy's door, "me. Not to stand in front of a man like Royce." "I know what I signed up for," I said, "and I know what I'd do anyway. Those are 2 different lists, and the second one's longer." She didn't smile, but something in her face eased just slightly, like a held breath let partway out. "Royce came in February, on a clear hard day with the snow crusted enough to ride on. I saw him before he reached the yard, 2 riders coming up my road, and I knew which one was him before I could have told you how. Something in the set of him. Clara saw them through the window and went the color of the snow, and then she did something that has stayed with me. She didn't run, and she didn't fall apart. She picked up the boy and carried him into Ruth's room and shut the door, and then she came back out and stood beside me at the window with her chin up and her hands steady, and she said, "Let me do the talking until I can't. Then it's yours." I had the rifle by the door. I didn't take it up. I'd learned that a gun in your hand makes the other man's hand reach for his, and I wanted, more than anything, for this to end with nobody's hand reaching. Royce was a big man gone soft, with a handsome, ruined face and the easy manner of someone who's never once doubted he's owed. His companion stayed back with the horses, hired, by the look of him, not invested. Royce came up onto my porch like he'd built it. "You'd be the rancher," he said to me, pleasant as anything, and then passed me to Clara. "There you are. You had us all worried sick running off like that, in the snow, with the boy." He shook his head, sorrowful. "That's no way for a grieving woman to act. People talk." "Say what you came to say," Clara said. "I came to take you and my nephew home," Royce said. "Where you belong. Family belongs together. Now I don't know what this man's told you or what he's wanting from you, a widow alone and easy to." "She's not alone," I said. Royce turned to me, still pleasant, still smiling. "No, looks to me like a fellow took advantage of a woman in a bad spot. That happens. No shame in admitting it. You let her come on home with me and we'll say no more about it." "She's my wife," I said. The smile didn't leave his face, but something behind it went cold and arithmetical, and I saw, for 1 second, the man Clara had described, the one who'd watched his brother die and done the sums. "That's a lie," he said softly. "There's a paper says different," I said. "Signed by Hollies in the valley 4 days after she left your place. You're welcome to ride down and read it. Your nephew's got a father now and a name and a roof. The law you're so fond of quoting works both ways. A married woman keeps her child. You know that. It's why you needed her not to be married." I watched him understand that he'd come too late. I watched the arithmetic run again behind his eyes, faster this time, the cost of fighting it, the cost of the talk that would follow if he was seen dragging a married woman off another man's land by force, the witness sitting on his own hired horse. And here is where I made the decision I've turned over more nights than I can count. Because Royce, cornered, did what cornered men do. He changed the shape of the fight. "A paper," he said. "Fine, a paper. But that boy in there is my brother's blood, and a court will care more about blood than about a paper a lonely old man signed to get himself a young wife and a free hand." He looked at me, and the cold came all the way to the front now. "I'll have him declared. I'll bring men who'll swear she's unfit, run off in a storm, near killed the child with cold and fever. I'll make it ugly. I'll make it last years. You want that on your old age, mister? You want to spend what's left of your life in courthouses, watching them pick this woman apart while the boy gets handed back and forth like a sack of feed." He let that sit. "Or you let me take him quiet today and I leave her be. She can keep your paper and your roof and your name. I just want the boy, and the land that comes with him." There it was, the arithmetic laid out plain. He'd trade Clara's freedom for Sam. He'd let her keep her safety if she'd hand over the child she'd ridden into a blizzard to protect. And the terrible thing, the thing I'm ashamed to even write, is that for one heartbeat, one single heartbeat, a small cowardly voice in me did the sums right alongside him. Years of courtrooms, a fight you might lose anyway, a child that isn't even yours. For one heartbeat, I understood exactly how a man talks himself into letting another man die because the roads are bad. I have thought a great deal in the years since about what makes a man one kind of thing instead of another. I used to believe it was something you were born with, fixed, like the color of your eyes. Now I think it's smaller than that and harder. I think a man is just the sum of the heartbeats he didn't spend doing the easy arithmetic. I'd had 11 years of easy. 11 years of a wall built one rock at a time, of carved animals on a sill, of a life arranged so that nothing could ever cost me anything again because I'd already paid everything I had. Royce was offering me my wall back. He was offering me my quiet. All I had to do was let him take the boy. "No," I said. That was all. One word. But I'll tell you, after 11 years of a single syllable being the safe answer to everything, That no came up out of me like something breaking the surface of deep water, and the breaking of it changed the air on the porch. Royce blinked. He'd expected the arithmetic to land. Men like him always do. They've never met a man who wouldn't do the sums. "You're a fool," he said, and the pleasant was gone now, all the way gone. "You'll lose everything over a child that's not yours." "He is mine," I said. "I signed a paper that says so, and I'll sign 100 more, and I'll stand up in any courthouse you can drag me to and say it to any judge alive. You want to spend years and money making this ugly. I've got nothing but years, mister. I've got nothing left that you can take. You can't threaten a man with the loss of a life he already lost once and built back from nothing." "But you—" I took one step toward him and I watched his hand twitch toward his coat and then think better of it because his hired man was watching and the sums had changed. "You've got a name in the valley you'd like to keep clean. You've got neighbors. And I've got a wife who watched you stand in a room and let your own brother die for 160 acres, and she'll say so, out loud, to everyone. I'll make it last year's too. I've got the time, do you?" It was a bluff and not a bluff. There was no proving what Clara had seen. But Royce didn't know that I knew that. All he knew was that the woman he'd counted on being alone and silent had a man standing in front of her now who just told him plainly that he had nothing left to lose. And there is no more dangerous man in the world than one who's already been to the bottom and found out he survived it. I watched the arithmetic run one last time behind his eyes. And I watched it come out against him. He stood there a long moment. The wind had picked up off the benches again, the way it does in the afternoons. Behind the door the boy had gone quiet, the way children do when they sense something in the grown-up air. The dog had come to stand at my leg, hackles up, that low sound in his chest. "This isn't finished," Royce said. But it was. We both heard that it was. A man who means to come back doesn't say so, he just comes. A man who says this isn't finished is a man telling himself a story he won't act on, so he can ride away calling it strategy instead of defeat. He rode away. I stood on the porch until the two of them were small on the road and then gone over the rise. And only then did my legs remember they'd been braced the whole time, and I had to put a hand on the post. Clara came out. She didn't say anything. She put her hand over mine on the post, and we stood there, the two of us, watching the empty road, and the boy pushed the door open behind us and toddled out and grabbed a fistful of my pant leg and looked up the road too at nothing, copying us, and I picked him up without deciding to. He never did come back, Royce. I heard later he sold off his own piece and went west, the way men like that always go west, chasing the next place where nobody knows the arithmetic they've done. The land, the 160 acres, Sam's land, Clara sold the next year to a decent family, and we put the money by for the boy, and that was the end of it. The thing Royce had killed his brother for, the thing he'd done sums on a child to get, he never got a foot of. I'd like to say there was justice in that. Mostly, there was just the ordinary mercy of a bad man wanting too many things at once and losing his grip on all of them. We never tore up the paper. Spring came and the road opened, the way Clara had said it would the night she rode in, and one morning I realized the day she'd named, the day she'd said she and the boy would go and I'd never see them again, had come and gone without either of us mentioning it. Neither of us ever did mention it. There are agreements you let lapse on purpose, by not speaking of them, the same way I'd kept my mouth shut on the ride home from the church for fear that saying a thing might make it go. We let the leaving day go by in silence, and in the silence it turned into staying. I'm an old man now, telling this. The boy, Sam, is a grown man with a place of his own 2 valleys over, and children, and he still calls me by the name he mangled when he was 2, Eli. Though he can say it right now and chooses the old way, and I have never told him there was ever a question about whose he was. As far as he knows, he was always mine. As far as I'm concerned, that's the truth, and the paper just caught up to it late. Clara's still here. Older too, slower, her hands gone stiff with the work of all these years, and I look at her across the supper table some nights, And I think about the woman on the porch with the steady eyes who said I'm sorry before she said anything else. And I think how close I came to closing the door. I went and counted them once, a few years back, the carved animals. The grief ones on the windowsill, the ones I'd made one a month through 11 years of being the last man on earth. There were 138. I'd stopped adding to them the winter Clara came, and never started again, and I'd never once noticed I'd stopped. A man counts the months when he's only surviving them. You quit counting when you start living them, and you don't even feel the difference until you go looking, years on. I keep the little wooden horse, the one Sam got down off the sill that first morning on the table by my chair. He gave it back to me when he left home, said a man his age had no use for it, said it like he was embarrassed, the way grown sons get. I didn't tell him what it was, or that it was the last thing I'd carved while another life was still whole before this one started. Some nights I sit with it in my hand and I think about the knock at the door, 3 soft taps, knuckles, not a fist. I think about how a man can spend 11 years believing the kindest thing the world can do is leave him alone.